Fox News Sunday. Where do we go with this story, and where does it go from here, Chris?
You're talking about the Kushner security story? Mm-hmm. Well, it is a subject that House Democrats were already planning to investigate, the whole question of how security clearances have been given out by the Trump White House. According to the New York Times, there were contemporaneous memos because they were so upset that reportedly the president ordered them to give this top-secret clearance to Kushner, that both the then Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and the then White House counsel, Donald McGahn, wrote down memorandums stating that they had opposed this and the president had ordered them to do it. And I would think that there's probably a congressional subpoena in their future, probably in the House Oversight Committee, much like Michael Cohen, to testify as to whether or not it's true.
We just spoke to Kellyanne Conway, getting fresh White House reaction. She was at CPAC. A little hard to hear, but we wanted to get fresh White House reaction to this story this morning. Here's how she responded, Chris.
We don't discuss security clearances. I'm not even going to discuss my own. But I will tell you that the president has the absolute right to do what was described, but we're not going to discuss that. I will tell you, as these stories are breaking, Jared Kushner was over in the Middle East working on behalf of the president, on behalf of this country.
But of course, the left is quick to point out, or any critics of this administration, that we have heard the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, comment on her husband's security clearance, saying that the president was not involved, and the president himself has said he wasn't involved. So they commented in the past on this. Now the White House response is that there is no response.
I would have to call what Kellyanne Conway said there a classic non-denial denial. When she says we don't talk about this, as you point out quite rightly, Sandra, they have talked about it in the past. If it were false, if in fact the president hadn't been involved, I can't imagine they wouldn't say that. They have no qualms about saying when news is fake, when reporting they think is inaccurate. They're not saying that about this story, so I think that speaks for itself.
Meanwhile, moving on to North Korea, and the words of the president when there, saying that he takes Kim Jong-un at his word over not knowing at the time about the treatment of Otto Warmbier. We also asked Kellyanne Conway about the latest statement from the family. She responded after just talking to the president with this.
Well, respectfully, Senator Graham doesn't know that, and I'm telling you what the president just told me, because that's where I work. And the president said that, of course, he agrees with the Warmbier family. North Korea is responsible for the death of their son. He's always said that will not change. What he believes Chairman Kim to have said is that he was not aware of what had happened to Otto Warmbier when it happened. I'm relaying to you what Chairman...
The White House sticking by the president's words, that he's taking Kim Jong-un at his word, that he didn't know at the time, but does indeed hold North Korea responsible for Otto Warmbier's death.
This strikes me as just a completely unforced error by the president and the White House. Why, on an issue like this, there's no question that Otto Warmbier was brutally tortured, basically killed by the North Koreans. Why on earth would you side with Kim Jong-un over the Warmbier family in the sense of outrage? I mean, first of all, there's a real question whether the captivity and the incarceration of an American is something that the dictator of North Korea wouldn't know about. But even if that's true, why would you want to get into this fight? The fact is the North Korean regime was responsible. You're getting pushback now from the Warmbier family. You're getting pushback from the president's former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who says that she holds the Kim regime responsible. And you had a lot of Republicans, Senate Republicans yesterday, like Cory Gardner of Colorado, say that Otto Warmbier's blood is on Kim Jong-un's hands. So I just don't understand why you'd even get into this and make it sound like in any way you're siding with Kim and saying that he is somehow to be held blameless for what happened to Otto Warmbier.
We put together a list this morning of those Senate Republicans. Rob Portman was one of them, warning the president not to be naive about the brutal nature of the North Korean regime. Lindsey Graham suggesting that maybe the president was trying to leave some space to negotiate when he said this. Susan Collins surprised that the president would accept those words at face value. We will continue to watch all of this. I'm sure you will as well. Chris Wallace, you'll have more on the second Trump-Kim summit this Sunday. You will be joined by, Chris, National Security Advisor John Bolton Sunday?
Yes, indeed, and plenty to talk about. North Korea, and we'll obviously ask him also about the Warmbier controversy, what's going on in Venezuela, Afghanistan, possibility of a peace deal there. Lots to talk about with the National Security Advisor. He was on the ground in North Korea. And of course, the big question is, despite, the issue as to the terms of how it broke down, where do we go from here? Are negotiations basically over, or is there possibility of future progress? Because at this point, Kim Jong-un has his entire nuclear arsenal, no testing, but he has kept the arsenal that the president was so upset about with no sign that he's going to give it up.
We'll be watching it all this weekend. Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace, thank you.
You bet, Sandra.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon says no military construction projects will be canceled to pay for the president's long-promised border wall. This after President Trump announced a national emergency that allows him to tap into military funds. Jennifer Griffin is live from the Pentagon with that. Jennifer.
John, President Trump is trying to assure lawmakers ahead of a crucial Senate vote on his declaration of a national emergency that he is not going to rob Pentagon coffers to pay for the border wall and affect readiness. Yesterday at an Air Force base in Alaska, he vowed to add more military construction money to next year's budget request, the funds he plans to borrow from to build the wall.
The fact is, we've increased your budget from not too much to $700 billion. And then from $700 billion, we went up to $716 billion. And I won't tell you this year's surprise, but the generals are going to be very happy when they hear, because it's going up yet again. Because we have no choice. I'm a cost cutter, but we have no choice. Without a military, what do we have?
Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, visited the border last weekend to see how the military can help secure the border. Under the national emergency, the president plans to have the Pentagon reallocate $3.6 billion from already appropriated military construction funds. This week, a defense official testified to a House Armed Services subcommittee that payment for these military construction projects would be deferred, not canceled.
I want to assure you that no currently authorized military construction projects will be canceled to fund military construction projects supporting use of the armed forces at the southern border.
Democrats on the subcommittee balked, saying this is simply a backdoor, possibly unconstitutional means to bypass Congress. John?
All right, Jennifer Griffin there at the Pentagon. Thank you.
Embattled Venezuelan officials turning to a key ally for help as the country's political and humanitarian crisis spirals downward. A live report from Caracas straight ahead.
Plus, another day of testimony from Michael Cohen in the books. Now, House Intel Committee members are hinting at new information in their probe of Russian election interference. Congressman Chris Stewart is on that committee, and he joins us next.
There's not much I can say. Other than it was very productive. As I said, I'm committed to telling the truth, and I will be back on March 6th to finish up. There's more to discuss.
That he was as forthcoming as he was. We made the same admonishment that my colleague Chairman Cummings made so eloquently, that he needed to tell us the full truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. None of the questions we had for him went unanswered.
The House Intelligence Committee questioning Michael Cohen for nearly 8 hours in a closed-door session yesterday, ending with the promise of him returning to the Hill next week. Now, some lawmakers are hinting at new information that could prove relevant in the panel's investigation into Russian election interference. Let's bring in House Intelligence Committee member Chris Stewart. Good to have you here this morning. So what new information could be relevant?
Well, I got to tell you that the vast majority of this hearing was just a rehearing of everything that we've heard before, not just from Mr. Cohen, but more broadly as well. The format is quite a bit different, and it's much more informative. Rather than 5 minutes for all these Congress people who take 4.5 minutes to give a speech and maybe ask a question at the end, each side, the majority and the minority, are given an hour, and we alternate back and forth, and anyone can speak, and you can speak or ask questions for as long as you want and bore down on certain lines of questioning. So it's much more informative. But if people are trying to present the impression that there was some dramatic new revelation or some dramatic thing that's going to lead to the president's impeachment or further legal jeopardy, I got to tell you that I just don't think that's true. And I can't go into details on the committee, but I can say this, that almost everything was things that almost everyone knows. And too often, everyone's chasing this new accusation, this new bombshell, this new revelation, and then, many times nothing comes of it. And I think that's probably about where we are right now.
What was your conclusion that you were able to draw about any collusion that Michael Cohen knew about with the president in Russia?
Well, he was very, very clear in our committee, but I won't speak about that, but I will speak what he said in the previous day's hearing. He was very clear. I have no direct evidence, have no evidence that there was any collusion or conspiracy. We asked him every possible which way we could. And you kind of, again, bore down on this deal. Well, I had my suspicions. Well, what are your suspicions, and are they based on any evidence? There is no evidence. And I think, frankly, anyone who's trying to craft the narrative that the president colluded with Russians during the election, anyone who's still saying that, I think they've just lost their minds. They're so tempered by their dislike, and frankly, sometimes hatred for this president, that they're willing to believe almost anything. I think most reasonable people have put that aside. But there are other things we want to talk about, and some of it you have to filter through this lens of, is he telling us the truth now? What is his motive for being here and saying these things? But he was very clear, and he's been very clear.
I know you're not commenting on
evidence.
I know you're not commenting on specifically what happened behind closed doors yesterday, but will we see a transcript of that publicly eventually?
Well, I hope so. I think we should. And I've made this argument for a long time. This isn't national security. This is a political process here. And most of this should be transparent and open to the public.
All right. As far as potential headaches for the White House and what's to come here,